Your cat couldn't shot one best ball when they came calling for the king.
Your
He
teepee tall
told
in a blue
us
sprawl when
when
they
they
came
came
calling
calling
for the
for the
king.
king.
So let
Oh,
your voice ring out as your spirit
it's
soars.
so
Cowboy,
cowboy,
stand
stand
here
here,
to
you
thank the
can go.
Lord, and let your soul before you light your path and guide you as it
As it
comes
comes
falling
falling
for.
for
Well, 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 isn't that just lovely? Clara Rose, undiscovered artist in Donegal this year, saw her perform at the Rory Gallagher Festival and she was fantastic. So that's Clara Rose and a song of some significance, all her own work and really beautiful harmonies and so on. It is Friday, it's 1 o'clock UK time. It's still early breakfast time in the States. Reggie Johnson, how are you? All the way from Texas.
Doing well. I'm awake. I'm awake.
Good man. Well, it's Friday, so welcome to the Sustack Plans Chat Club, where we discuss everything about AI innovation and ethics in marketing and business. I'm PR Smith, the author and founder of Sustack Planning, and Reggie Johnson is Director of Communications for Student Affairs at UNT Health in Fort Worth, Texas, USA. We've got a session, big news during the week, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, looking at Meta's $17 billion settlement. How great or how awful is it? And there's a lot to go through it, looking at the actual numbers, the product changes, the settlement itself. Is a child worth $17 billion or more, or several children? And I'm going to squeeze something in from somebody we really like over here, his opinion on this whole thing. He's calling it Meta's masterstroke. So we'll get the gloves off and dive into this stuff this morning, or today, should I say, or in the UK. We have got a quick look at Chinese tech licensing innovation to the West, and really pleased to mention, we'll only just mention it this week, we'll do more detail next week, sensory comfort for the web. Now, this is quite an innovation, and we'll tell you more about that. And we'll finish with 3 great questions that can diffuse conflict instantly. We always like to finish on a positive note. So let's get stuck in straight away. You've heard the big news. I'm sure it's all across America, Reggie. Meta's $17 billion statement. Just for people who aren't familiar with what we've been following this closely for a long time. But Reggie, can you tell us, just give us a summary, what's it all about, and what's involved, and how much involved, and who's involved, and all that?
So Meta is the creator of Facebook and Instagram. They have been one of the dominant player in social media for many, many years. And for an increasing number of years, people have been pointing out some of the harms. We've seen more and more whistleblowers coming forward from behind the scenes at Meta. And there's more and more evidence that they've been aware of the harms of their products, including having data on children under 13, which is a violation of the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, COPPA. That they also know that their age verification doesn't work, and yet they still, we have internal documents showing that they know this, and yet they don't do anything about it. They know that their platform is harmful to kids, and it's addictive. Is a question that a lot of people have. Is it addictive or not? Well, if the products are like dopamine hits, they're intended to addict. But it comes down to an interesting question in the realm of social media, and that is Meta responsible for the harm from their own products? Now, you might think that's an obvious question, because of course they should be responsible for the harm of their own products. If I made a vacuum cleaner that took off people's toes when it was going around the living room, you'd say they are responsible. But Section 230 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act specifically says that web hosts are not, or tech platforms in general, but it's really targeting web hosts, are not responsible for the content that people put on their servers. And that has been applied to say that social media companies are not liable for content that other people put on their platforms. So up until now, the focus has been on harmful content. Paul and I have kind of taken a little bit of a different approach. For the past 5 years, we've been calling for algorithmic transparency, for an increased scrutiny of the algorithms, and an ability to have algorithmically neutral feeds. That's where Meta doesn't feed you the content that they think will addict you or that they know will addict you, but you get to follow the people you want and have the most recent content show, or fine tune it to your own liking rather than them determining what you get to keep your attention. Now, this is a recent change in strategy for the lawyers, and Meta was on a big winning streak with court cases. You remember that, Paul? They kept being, because antitrust cases came forward, and those are notoriously hard to prosecute. Also, so they hid behind Section 230 a lot. They were granted wide immunity to not be responsible for toxic content other people put, even though it was obvious that they were not trying to remove disinformation about harmful.
Just to clarify that, Reggie, Section 230 says tech platforms are not liable for the content that they show. Is that correct?
They're not liable for the content that other people put on their platforms. And since the majority of content is being put on by other users, this has allowed social media companies to not be responsible for the toxic content that appears. The difference is they actually are promoting that content. Unlike web hosts that host websites, social media companies are feeding that content. They're pushing it in front of kids, in front of people. And this is where the new strategy of focusing on algorithms as being dangerous and not just the content has finally made some progress. They're on about a 6-month losing streak with California, Los Angeles case, and New Mexico, and now this 47 states taking on Meta and leading to a verdict of 17.1, or not a verdict, I apologize, it's a settlement. They settled before Zuckerberg was set to take the stand for $17 billion.
Okay. That's very interesting, Reggie. So the lawyers have found a different angle to go after Meta, it seems. Whereas previously they were saying this content is obscene, it's dangerous, it's suicidal, it's getting kids to kill themselves. And Meta were saying, well, it's not our content, we can't be blamed for that. And they won that argument. But the lawyers now turned and said, yes, but your algorithm is selecting the content and delivering it to these kids. I think that's the difference. And they said that you are responsible for that. And that seems to be the turning point. And it's, I don't know, could you imagine whoever the lawyer was came up and says, well, hang on, we can't get them on the content, but we could get Meta on the algorithm. So it seems that that's what happened. And it's the question that comes arise, well, 17 billion, the initial reaction is, oh my goodness, this is huge. It's massive, $17 billion. But I'm going to question that, really. How big a payment is $17 billion? I think it would have been an awful lot bigger if it actually went to court and there was a penalty or a fine imposed. 17 billion, I'm thinking, is about 1% of the market capitalization of the whole business. They're worth 1.47 trillion, Meta are. So that 17 billion is less than 10% of the turnover, which was 200 billion. So. And the payment spread, they've insisted on spreading it across 10 years. So it's not one lump sum, it's going to be spread across 10 years. And a naughty twist in the agreement they've come to is that they're holding 30% of the payment back until YouTube and TikTok make the same changes. So they're kind of holding the courts to ransom, it seems to me. And here's the really strange bit of, well, how big is 17 billion, is that when it was announced that they had a 17 billion settlement, the shares went up, right up.
That tells you something, huh?
That tells you something. It tells you a lot. And in fact, the increase in the share value, I think, was more than 17 billion. So, you have to ask the question, somebody, Pascal Hetzold, we've covered him before. He suggested that Meta could have been on the hook for $1 trillion in damages. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's 1,000 billion as opposed to 17 billion. So there's a big difference there. Now, somebody else then had a look at the actual So Meta have agreed to pay this over 10 years, 70% and 30% if you do the rest. and they've agreed to product changes, which is probably far more significant, really, in the impact it's going to have, I think. So they've brought in the 2-hour time limit for kids under 18. Instagram, I presume it applies to Facebook as well. No more nudges. There will be nudges telling people to take a break. There'll be a limit on the number of notifications or notifications period between 8 and 3 p.m. That's school time, I assume. And teenagers won't be able to use it at night. And that's wonderful if I'm reading this correctly. It seems like there's some good things that will come from this, but of course, there's all the challenges that comes with bans, as Australia has learned, and so on and so forth. So the tide seems to be turning, but I'm a little bit skeptical and a little bit hesitant. So we had a look at Kelly Stonelake. Now, Kelly is amazing, whistleblower, and she really is worth a listen to. So all of these bits and sources we're telling you, we'll list on prsmith.org/blog, where we put the show notes down, and we'll give you links to everything in there. And Kelly's, her videos are worth a watch. And she kind of says it's just the beginning. And I think that's the way to look at it. Meta has refused to admit wrongdoing. They haven't said they've done anything wrong. And the timing of the agreement just before Mark Zuckerberg was expected to testify, that would have been fascinating. So there is some hesitation on their part. I think we'll see other people popping up and saying it's good news, but it's only a first step. The addictive design features and predator risks, the settlement does not fully address, says Kelly, but so partially. So there's more work to be done there. And so what Meta's recent courtroom losses reveal about the company's knowledge of harm. So they've kind of established that, the company was aware of the harm. So I'm going to, Reggie, you're a big fan of Nikki Petrosi, who's campaigned here for children for a long time. And she's an amazing lady, no doubt about it. Now, what does she think of it?
Nikki Petrosi had an interesting interview with Arturo Bahar, who is a former ex-Facebook, I believe, who has, I believe he's turned whistleblower. And she was asking him about his thoughts. She's also sharing some of her thoughts. But really, they've emphasized this same notion that we heard from Juliana Arnold and Kelly Stonelake on their interview on the news that you were just referencing. And that was that this needs to be the beginning and not the end, and that we shouldn't feel like all of a sudden now these platforms are safe. The changes are relatively small compared to what we really need. Nothing is addressing the addictive algorithms or the ability to handle that. It's I think the words that Arturo Bahar used is it's a lot of safety theater. And this is the pattern with Meta.
Safety theater.
Because this is the pattern with Meta. When they're backed against a wall, when it looks like they're going to have a bad ruling, they suddenly try to come across as really conscientious and concerned about children's privacy and harms. But really, we know from internal documents, they're not at all. They only care about profits. And it's quite disgusting to see from what a lot of the people have said. They feel disgusted by Meta's continuous destruction of trust. There's no reason to trust them after this. Their backs are against the wall, and they still have the audacity to say, well, we can't compete with TikTok and YouTube unless you make them do the same thing. So if we're really committed to child safety, why are they saying that 30% of the money they've agreed to pay is only going to come if the courts force TikTok and YouTube to do the same thing? Well, that's purely based on competition, but they're trying to make it sound like we're trying to be leaders in our industry. They're not leaders. They've been sitting on this data for a decade, knowing the harm of this. We've been with them through Cambridge Analytica, the harms through COVID of the disinformation, the attempted insurrection in America, and the fact that they've allowed all this disinformation and even like riling up of people for riots and stuff to go on their platforms. And then, but really, all of that is secondary to the harms to kids, the addictive nature, and we're not even addressing that. So Arturo Bahar and Nikki Petrosi say this is great that we're seeing some accountability. We are starting to see perhaps the tide turning, But this needs to be the start. And interestingly, kind of connected to that, one of our listeners, Robin, said, I do hope the plaintiffs in this case we mentioned share all their case notes with everyone globally to take on the mantle against these social media companies so they get hit everywhere, because this has only got a certain domain in the USA, and the rest of the world needs to also be able to affect the same kind of change. So Nikki Petrosi, glad to see some accountability. We're with you on that. But the thing is, these platforms are based on aloneness by design. They're made to the phone, the app. They're made to make you alone, and that's when the worst damage occurs. And that's one of the reasons why Arturo talks about not when you talk to your kids about this, not allowing it to be a disconnection between you and your kid, because they need that connection. You don't want to isolate them so they're just alone with their platform. You need to think about connection. It also talks about, we need to demand more. We need to demand more of these companies. It's the beginning of accountability. We need independent measures of harm, not just Facebook or Meta saying certain things they're going to do and then doing it. We need independent measures of harm. And there is an independent auditor component in this mix that'll be interesting to see how that works out. But we don't have a definition of harm that could make Meta accountable to somebody else's definition. So there's definitely reason to feel like, well, like we saw the stock market go up, Meta got off the hook here with essentially chump change. And there's some reason to feel hopeful that maybe we'll see more progress in this area now that the court cases are starting to pile up. I think really what would be insulting to parents of kids who have lost kids, like Juliana Arnold, who was on the news about this, is the fact that they are not forced to admit any wrongdoing, despite the fact that we have internal documents showing that they know the harms and they're not even addressing that.
Well said. And you're right. Julia Arnold, who appeared with Kelly Stonelake in the link to the video we'll show you, she, God love her, is lost a child, and obviously it's a raw wound for her to suffer as a parent, and then to see Meta not actually put the hand up and saying, we got it wrong, we did it wrong, we're very sorry, or whatever. I would have imagined the whole board of directors, I don't know the law well enough to say it, but aren't directors responsible for negligence? But I suppose the argument is it's not negligent if they're aware of it. Or maybe it is. I don't know the law well enough.
Well,
but
it should be. If they're aware of it and they continue to do it, that is criminal negligence. And that's why it's important that they're not forced to admit wrongdoing. And I will point out that Arturo Bahar said, they stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the tobacco industry and the opioid industry in knowingly concealing the harms that they know about and trying to fight against their accountability. History will show that.
Yes, indeed. History will show that. Well, another perspective on this, again, this is from a very American perspective. This is Rex Lee. Now, Rex Lee is an expert in child protection and has been lobbying, and has not just lobbying, he advises governmental bodies in America on this whole issue. And he wrote a piece saying, is 17 billion worth more than a child's life? Now, it's quite a brutal headline. But he goes on to say that experts like Tristan Harris, Jonathan Haidt, Nikki Petrosi, who we know well, compare addictive design to alcohol and drugs. And he's got an infographic that I reposted, but it's quite shocking. And it's very clearly saying, okay, 17 billion, who's the winners, who's the losers? And he's saying, well, actually, there's very few real winners with this. It's literally the starting point. And this idea of it being the starting point is exactly what we were getting from Kelly Stonelake and Julia Arnold. They both said this is just the beginning. It's not the time to sit down and celebrate, because actually there's a very, very contra opinion of the $17 billion settlement. But Rex Lee takes it to pieces, and I'll put a link to his piece. It's very strongly worded, and he is an expert in the area. But he's highlighting stuff like, well, there's no recall of harmful digital products. Why isn't that happening? Or why aren't they shutting down immediately and saying we'll open again in 3 weeks when it's all fixed? So there's big holes in it. Children and teenagers still remain exposed to addictive design and behavioral manipulation, he says. And he says it's business as usual in Silicon Valley. The advertisers face no consequences for funding tech addiction. Now, I'm going to come back to that because I've mentioned I'm involved with a group that is looking at responsible marketing and at stopping addictive platforms per se. And, developing a badge where brands could say, we don't use addictive platforms. Now, that would be a shock if we could get that happening. Rex, we're involved with some discussions with Rex on this. So, we'd like the advertisers to actually say, well, actually, we're advertising elsewhere, and we will, for that, we have a little badge to say we don't support addictive, or we don't use addictive sort of platforms. So Rex finishes with: a settlement is not a product recall, a corporate fine is not a prison sentence, and no amount of money can replace a child. End of story. Very powerful. I want to put one more layer on top of this. Reggie, you might remember some time ago, I mentioned Mark Barkowski. Now, I'm a big fan of Mark Barkowski. He's just a great writer. In fact, I've got one of his books about photography and PR on the shelf behind me there. And I've always liked his style of writing and what his work, generally speaking. And he's the guy that coined the phrase. There's a big trend out there in society, and it is this: that people are choosing to be outraged rather than choosing to try to understand something. Hence, polarization is happening, and people are digging into those holes and never coming out, never seeing the other side, never interested in asking about the other side. So I really like that phrase. I actually said that to an ex-Microsoft director friend of mine, and I said it to him about a year ago. And playing golf with him the other day, and he said to me, "Do you know what? I can't get that saying out of my head. This trend we kind of prefer to take the easy option of outrage and now maybe I should apply this to Meta. Maybe I shouldn't be outraged with what Meta, I think, have got away with. Maybe I should be trying to understand it more and the impact it might have with the other tech companies and so on and so forth. So I'm guilty here as well. But anyways, this is Mark Barkowski's view on it, and it's short and sweet. He says, and he works in the PR industry, and he says, American PR experts are calling Meta's latest move a masterstroke, like a victory, like it's a victory for them. The $17 billion payout is like a victory for them. He says, Meta began, I don't know if you know this, Reggie, but Meta began taking out full-page advertisements already, calling on TikTok and YouTube to introduce similar restrictions for teenagers. And this is what Mark says. So if TikTok and YouTube follow, you can see this like a game of chess, king to L7 and queen to M8 or whatever. So if TikTok and YouTube follow, Meta then can claim it forced the industry to change. It's the hero.
Yeah.
And of course, if the rest of the industry refuses to change, Meta can keep asking the question, why are these companies not prepared to raise the standards that we have been imposed on them, but they'll just say the standards we have. So either way, the attention shifts from what Meta did to what everybody else is doing or not doing.
Yeah.
So masterstroke in PR terms are, well, that's unethical PR, but there you go. And it is the familiar corporate miracle in which the organization leaving the scene of the accident reappears moments later in a high visibility jacket to direct the traffic. Is that for real? Isn't it? So he finishes with, Meta has changed the conversation. Bang. So there's a completely different perspective on the $17 billion. Let's be grateful that they've put their hands up to a limited degree. Some money is going to be paid and used sensibly, and they will change some of the product. But as people have said today, this is just the beginning. It is not a result, the game, set, match at all. And I think we've tried to show both sides of it and be very clear that the pressure should be kept on them And there will be lots of other court cases coming up, I assume.
Well,
So,
Paul,
yep.
this actually, what you just said is a really good reason why communication and public relations people are so important. They're not consulted on some of these things when it comes to settlements. $17 billion is a small price to pay for potentially the amount of goodwill they could generate from making it look like this was their industry leadership. We've seen this with big industrial companies where they pollute an area and then they're forced to clean it up, and then they take out full page ads saying, look at how clean we're being for the environment. It's like, that's just a regular thing. And so to not have PR people looking at, are they really winning with this? Because I think lawyers look at, this is the amount of money. They want to get the amount of money. This $17 billion is a lot of money. That's a win for the people. But really, to hold a company accountable, you also need to look at the PR angle. And I will add one thing. One of my favorite quotes is Cutlip and Sinners, the book on the famous book on public relations. Their book on it, they say that public relations, they define it as mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and the audiences, the publics upon whom their success depends. Mutually beneficial relationships. So according to that classic definition of public relations, if it is not mutually beneficial, it's not public relations. Therefore, it's just theater. I feel like that's something where it shouldn't be called. It gives PR a bad name, but it shouldn't be called public relations if it's not mutually beneficial. And people should be not called public relations practitioners if they repeatedly create this kind of theater that is not mutually beneficial.
Well, there's a good question for the various institutes of public relations and public relations associations and so on and so forth. Be very, very interesting. I'll be sharing this information with a few people who are kind of working actively in this space. And maybe, Reggie, you, I'm sure, will be doing likewise. We will look at, the time is a bit tight. We kind of got stuck into this. So we'll come back to the global patent power shift. We'll come back to that next week. And we'll also come back to something very interesting, the sensory comfort for the web. Now, this is Martin Murtaugh, who's developed this highly innovative approach to screens. It's called Minddropic. So it makes websites more comfortable and more easy to use if you find it a little bit challenging, as he does and many other people do, depending on various conditions. So the sensory comfort for the web, I don't want to say anything more than that. We'll give it a good discussion next week. We'll explore, see exactly. But I think this is something significant, will help a lot of people, and my congratulations to Martin. We'll put a link up to it on prsmith.org/blog. We put a link up anyway if you want to have a look at that in advance of next week. Okay, we wanted to finish on a positive note like we try to, and great questions. Reggie, you know I'm a lover of great questions.
Yes, great questions. Being able to ask great questions is such an important skill, an underrated skill. And I love great questions. I've been thinking about them a lot, collecting them. What are good questions? Really, they're exciting when you hear a great question. One of those questions that makes you think, and also one of those questions that can help you get to an answer that you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't asked a great question. And I know this is a thing, or of course, a great question can be frightening if it's your boss asking you something you're not prepared to answer. But you, Paul, you have a thing for great questions as well.
Yeah, I've been collecting great questions for years now. In fact, I'm going to write a little book on it further down the road. But the art of a great question can reduce risk in decision making to zero. So, the art of making a great decision, define what the issue is, the problem or the opportunity, define it clearly, then define what information you need to make a great decision, then get the information, digest it, and decide. So which of those 5 steps is the weakest one? It tends to be number 2, which is decide what information do you need to make a great decision. So if your daughter says in 10 years' time, Reggie, I'm going to get married, wouldn't you like to know about the guy or the girl or whoever? You want to know. So what would be the good questions to ask? Or in a big business investment, before you put your money in, what questions should you ask to reduce the risk? And if you could get that information in, you could actually bring risk down to just about zero. Now, we do this in Sustack Planning. We actually push very hard, but these are questions, essential questions, like the customer analysis: who, why, how. Big questions have to be asked. Now, Now, I find most interviewers are not the best at asking great questions. I kind of mentioned Michael Parkinson and Graham Norton as being natural flowing discussion interviewers. They could let the flow. But I came across, and I think it's very rare, but I came across this, and I posted it during the week, but we'll post a link again to it. Alvin Fu highlighted this clip of video. It's unsourced. I will try and find out who the speaker is. But he says, here's 3 questions that can actually solve so much friction and issues between people. He says, here's the 3 questions. When somebody's complaining or going against you relentlessly, you say, okay, what do you suggest? That's a great question. What do you suggest? That's one great question. And ask it more than once. Keep coming around, and eventually it may move the discussion in the right direction. The second great question is, what would it take for you to agree? Now, I remember a sales guy trying to sell to me once when I was working with a Belgian multinational, and he said to me, "What will it take me to close this deal with you?" I thought, wow, that's we're getting, by the answer I'm going to give him is going to bring him very close to getting a deal if it's reasonable. And the third question is, can you live with it? Sometimes if you're at loggerheads over maybe just the final details of an agreement, and then you think, really, if I let that one go, could I live with that? Sometimes it just kind of goes, yeah, let's get on with it. We can give away a little bit and live with it. So 3 great questions. What do you suggest? What would it take for you to agree? And can you live with it? So we'll show you that video clip on pearsmith.org/blog. It's just gone past 1:30, Reggie. We've got a minute over time. I do apologize to you and our friends. We'll play it out with Clara Rose. I think it was worth spending time on this major discussion today. I hope this is useful to people to expand it, because we're trying to get away from the idea of just pure outrage. We're trying to understand what's going on below the surface and get a bit deeper into these sorts of things. So hopefully that's been useful. Let's end today with Clara Rose again. Same song. Here she is. We wish you all a great weekend. All the best, Reggie and everybody else. Cheers for now. See you next week.
You're forever Valentine, you're Sophia Loren. I think she's calling for you, kid. So let your voice ring out as your spirit soars. Cowboys and Indians whoop and roar, and let your soul before you light your path and guide you as it comes calling for you, kid.
We post a link to Clara Rose on pearsmith.org/blog and everything else as well. Reggie, I'll say farewell and goodbye to everybody.
Bye.